One of the challenges that FinTechs have with their interactions with the banks or credit unions is just the communication, working with the organizations that really get it and having a path to a successful outcome to help the FinTech get to market and vice versa, help the bank meet its goals. I mean, the reason why the bank and credit unions are doing this is to grow the deposits and create fee income for the bank and to be around for the long term to iterate.
Welcome in, everybody. You're listening to Wrestling Payments, a podcast where we help payment professionals contend with the challenges of modernizing their payments operations and identifying ways to build for the future. If you're interested in payments innovation and modernization, you're in the right place. Now, let's get into it.
Welcome back to Wrestling Payments FinTech Shark Week, where we spent the last few episodes exploring the ins and outs of FinTech partnerships, what works, what doesn't, and why getting it right matters more than ever for financial institutions navigating the future of payments. So today's episode is a special one, and we talked a lot about strategies, infrastructure, risk, and hesitation, but now we're going to bring it all together with a real-world success story, one that started with a big vision, a clear understanding of where the gaps were, and a commitment to finding the right partner for the growth, right? And so we'll walk through what the starting point looked like, how the team identified the right opportunities, and what ultimately made the partnership click, from building trust to scaling the offering itself and everything in between. So it's the kind of story that proves community financial institutions can play in the same sandbox as some of these larger banks when the right ingredients are in place. So joining me today is someone who's lived this experience firsthand. I'm excited to have him here and share his perspective with us and take us behind the scenes on what success really looks like in this space. So we have from North Bay Credit Union, the CEO, Chris Call. Chris, you want to tell them a little bit about yourself and your institution?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me, Elyssa. I'm very excited to be here and tell you about my experience. I've been CEO of North Bay Credit Union for the last 12 years, and we're a small credit union located in Northern California. And we've just gotten involved in the whole FinTech bank sponsorship area in the last couple of years.
Great. And just a brief introduction. Some of you may have heard from Daryn and Randy on a previous episode, but we also have Daryn Barney with us here from Rural Partners and Randy San Nicolas from Braid joining us. So making the conversation lively and a lot of input from different parts of the relationship, I guess you could say. So you said you're a small credit union. What is your asset size, if I can ask?
Our assets are currently about $150 million under control.
Excellent. And so you hopped into the sponsorship space. Can you tell us a little bit about in what capacity you guys are operating?
Well, we've taken on the role of bank sponsor for a number of FinTechs who want payment processing services primarily. This is wire transfers, ACHs. We also work with some crypto companies and doing their on and off ramps for their fiat currencies. We take deposits, obviously, and can help FinTechs out in that way as well.
That's a lot. What led you to this? Did you guys have a plan? Did you have an idea? Was it something that was brought to your attention by a third party? What kind of got you thinking to jump into this?
Yeah, so as a small credit union, we're in a market that is dominated by larger financial institutions, and we knew that we were going to have to either innovate or be merged out of existence eventually through a bank merger of some kind. So we started looking at opportunities for us to exploit those niche markets. And the first thing that became apparent that was a very much needed service in our area was cannabis banking. We live in an area where there's a lot of cannabis activity. A lot of operators work and operate out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And so we were one of the first institutions in the country that took on the role of accepting cannabis operators as banking clients. So as part of that, we had to develop a very extensive compliance infrastructure. And several years go by, and we developed the expertise in compliance and transaction monitoring and payment issues related to that industry. And we began to be approached by payment providers who were looking to service cannabis operators. And because that's a very, very niche area and very specialized, we were one of the few banking institutions that would even be, open to talking to those fintech companies about those services. So in those discussions, it became apparent that those payment providers needed a sponsor bank to be able to sponsor their activities with the Federal Reserve. And so that kind of led to the whole idea of why don't we expand upon the compliance infrastructure that we had developed for cannabis banking and extend that to a bank sponsorship role. And so that's what kind of led us into that area. But we knew also very early on that as a small credit union, we would not be able to scale up and handle the volume that would be required of us unless we had some technological means of handling all the activity. And then that's what further led us to Braid and Randy's group. So we've been working with them now for the past year to help scale up our operations and take on a really significant volume of payment activity.
So you started with one spot, which opened up opportunities for another, but you've kind of built this solid foundation in that space as far as compliance and are able to kind of replicate that over here for sponsor relationships. Daryn and Randy, anything to add to the conversation around identifying one opportunity and how that could possibly open up some additional opportunities for you in relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I can share from my perspective the observation that we see with banks that enter into and expand further financial institutions into fintech is very similar to what Chris's experience has been, where there's a market need and is generally built off of building out specialized regulatory compliance and risk controls to serve the need in the market. We see this happen, a number of years ago as cannabis became an industry. There became a need, just like any other product or services, a need for bank partners to provide reliable banking. But not every bank was built to do that. So the banks that took the steps to, one, understand, and then two, build out policies, processes, procedures to serve the market, gave a good foundation to enter into the space and serve the need, which is very much a gateway to expansion into other industry types. Generally, we see banks that grow and expand a very robust and diverse fintech initiative start with an industry, and cannabis is one of them because it's a very complex industry in terms of really understanding it and working closely with the regulators to do it in a safe and compliant manner, to have the relationship with the regulators to be able to do it for not just a short term, but for a long term. And so for Chris and North Bay, what they've been able to do over the years and have that legacy is a testament to the perspective of evolution, right? This is how this now develops. And so this is where we see many of the financial institutions identify a niche market where there's a need to be filled, to meet that need, and then from there expand on the success. What is working? Now, what does that mean in terms of other market opportunities to expand the scope from there, which then essentially develops and builds out a long-term sustainable strategy, because if a bank takes no action, that's the biggest threat. What has always been isn't what will always be. So to make a strategic move with the right steps in the process really builds out the long-term strategy. So again, this is a theme that we see with the financial institutions, building off of one, really understanding it, building a culture of compliance and understanding, and then looking at expansion for the long term. So it's exciting to see this, and we've got other stories that are similar to what Chris has built out, and they've continued to build the bank and continue to grow in those areas of deposits and fee income and taking on and serving additional industry types to capture what I love about Chris's opening is that it's really a global perspective. We're truly moving into an environment where transactions are facilitated across borders. And to manage that in an effective way, banks and financial institutions, credit unions need to remain the center of gravity of that, and that requires the banks to evolve and iterate throughout the ecosystem.
Excellent.
Well, I wanted to share some thoughts, as I was reflecting on sort of how the relationship evolved. I think I view it more from the implementation perspective because that's the background that we come from, like implementing payment systems. And one of the immediate things I noticed and have soon become more aware of is that it is possible for a financial institution to resemble a startup in many ways, right? So there is the ability to look at the market and say, okay, what skill sets and what assets do we have in place? How do we pursue opportunities, that are potentially more, risky or on the fringe of innovation, but still do it in this container of compliance. And so watching Chris's organization, sort of unfold all these opportunities and manage it is literally inspiring. Like, he has a top-notch team that can wrangle these large, and these are massive opportunities, right? And it gets pretty exciting. That, a team with the right technology and the right outlook and the right level of confidence and, just desire to move things forward, that combination is the sweet spot. And so I'm really excited to be working with Chris and paving the future for other institutions to do the same.
Well, and I think that's a really good segue into my next question that I was about to ask anyways. You have staff, you have the skill set there, but did you have the buy-in from the beginning? And if not, was there any hesitation? Was there any concern? Did anybody dig their heels in? And if so, how did you get all those stakeholders to the table, kind of row in the right direction to build, the successful situation you got going for you right now?
Yeah, well, with our involvement in the cannabis industry, we have a very progressive mentality anyway, and probably a higher tolerance for risk than other financial institutions. So our board of directors was supportive of us, doing more with less. So they knew that as a small credit union, we had to really reach out into these untapped markets. And the role of a credit union is really to support the underbanked and the unbanked. And so we found that certainly in cannabis and also in a lot of the FinTechs that we're working with, we're providing a banking service that is neglected by the commercial banking industry as in total. And we're providing a service that kind of meets the needs of consumers and small business owners alike to provide a service for their customers that they couldn't otherwise provide if we weren't making our services available. So our internal team was a little bit hesitant at first. It was a daunting proposal because none of us had been exposed to sponsor banking. That was all new to us, but we kind of approached it the same way that we had done cannabis banking, and that it was an opportunity and we needed to sort of dig in our heels and learn the industry and learn the nuances of what was going to be required, and then construct a program that would allow us to safely operate this kind of a business. We reached out to our regulators, asked for their advice and input. Unfortunately, credit union regulators are not very familiar at all with sponsor banking activities. This is more of a commercial banking role. And so we're one of the very few, if perhaps not the only credit union that is doing this activity that I'm aware of. But nevertheless, it's a valid banking function that we're chartered to do as a financial institution. And we work closely with the Federal Reserve Bank and the card brands and other financial partners to make the program work safely and in compliance with all of our rules and regulations. So our team has come around to the point where they were, a little bit overwhelmed with the opportunity and not sure how that would develop, but now they feel comfortable and their understanding of what's required is greatly enhanced as we've gotten involved more and more.
No, that's great to hear. Sometimes it's the people on the ground that know the ins and outs, that truly understand how much of a kind of massive undertaking it is. So once you get them under your wing and ready to go, usually you're in a good place, right? So really good to hear. So I was going to kind of touch on identifying the right fit as far as technology goes to be able to offer this sponsor banking service. So how did you get into conversations with Randy about what he was offering and what really stood out for you as his, core being the best way to move forward and service these relationships?
Yeah, I think we were introduced to Randy and Braid through a mutual contact, but it was quickly apparent that if we were going to do this activity, it needed to be done at scale. And, it's not the kind of thing you can just dabble in. It's got to be a pretty strong commitment to do it and do it right. And so we knew that our small team was not going to be able to handle the volume of work that had to be done unless there was a technological solution to process all these payments that we knew would be coming at us. And so our conversations with Randy initially were, how can the Braid core provide us with the opportunity to scale our compliance infrastructure and to make it work for a large volume of payment activity. And so those conversations went great, and Randy was able to show us how his platform worked and how we could really take on a sizable volume of activity to make it worthwhile for our own efforts and financially to benefit our credit union members.
Excellent. Randy, you have anything to add to that? My little plug for Braid.
Yeah, I mean, it was a cold, dark night when Nadira reached out to us on our website. So they reached out, it was a mutual contact, and immediately, the conversation goes usually something like, we want to get into, sponsorship activity. What are the options available to us? You have the standard banking as a service component, you have processors, so they all exist. And I think where we connected was Chris and his team had a deep vision to really own a lot of the entire process, right? And so that's really what Braid is about. We, ultimately, we are a software vendor, and we help institutions realize their vision for the future, right? And that alignment was, I think, Chris, that our relationship came together, in like 2 months? Like from contact to, it was like we dated and we're like, okay, let's get married. So done. And like you said, we've been working together for almost a year now, and it's a bright future. I'm really excited about the partnership.
Yeah, I would just add too, Elyssa, that I think that it's really important to have a sort of a meeting of the minds about who you are and what you want to achieve. And we felt that very early on with Randy and Jake at Braid, that they kind of understood us and what we were all about and what we were trying to do. And we felt like what they were doing was very much in line with our sort of compliance mentality and making sure that everything was buttoned down tightly before we took it on as a risk.
Right, because there's so many different ways you could go about this, and a lot of times it feels much more comfortable when it's you have this hands-on approach where everything's in-house and, like you said, under your control. So anything you would put out there to your peers, smaller community banks, other credit unions of your size, and I've said this repeatedly over the last 6 episodes, that, we do continue to see consolidation. And so that fear you had to kind of push you towards, exploring these opportunities is one that's still very real for a lot of those folks. So anything you could think to say to those institutions kind of sitting on the sidelines right now?
Yeah, I think it's just you have to really assess, who you are as an institution, what you're trying to accomplish. I think risk tolerance is key, because unless you've got a really strong appetite for taking on some challenging situations, and you've got a team that's capable of addressing those situations, then you probably want to address that before you try to take on a role with sponsor banking. We've got a payment team that's tremendous. We've got compliance people that are excellent. And it's all about coordinating those people with the FinTechs and Braid, and also working with, as I mentioned, the card brands and the Federal Reserve System, our correspondent credit union. So there's a lot of sort of detailed information that's really required to possess in your body of knowledge, I guess, before taking on this kind of a role. But if you have that and you feel comfortable with it, then certainly banking sponsorship is a much needed niche market in terms of their need for banking services, and is a growing opportunity. I think there's FinTechs popping up all the time that are looking for this kind of service, and there's no shortage of business to be had. We're now looking at opportunities all around the world. We're sponsoring FinTechs that are based in Asia, in Europe, South America, Canada. And we're a small little credit union based in Northern California. No one would have thought that we could handle this kind of volume. By the end of the year, we anticipate that we'll be processing upwards of about $1 billion a month in payment transactions. So it's exciting for us, also a bit daunting, as I mentioned. We're somewhat trepidatious about how this is all going to play out and as it continues to grow. But again, we feel comfortable that having a partner like Braid on board is going to allow us to manage that growth and be successful.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you have a couple of different arms going here. You have some cross-border payments, you have your cannabis banking side of the house. What other fintech sponsorships are you doing specifically?
Well, in addition to the standard fintech that's just serving customers via ACH processing or wire transfers, we're also now looking at digital currency and stablecoin opportunities. And again, those create a whole new set of issues and challenges from a compliance standpoint. But we kind of see that as the wave of the future. And unless you tackle that and get involved early on, you're going to be chasing the lead dogs, and we would rather be the lead dog.
Yeah,
So,
it gives you that competitive advantage, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Daryn, Randy, you have anything to kind of add to the conversation at this point?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And this is really, accolades to Chris and his perspective, his leadership here. Really an example for the industry, right? In terms of taking action, not sitting on the sidelines and watching I love your words there, Chris, the lead dog, you want to be the lead dog. There's a significant opportunity with the intersection between fintech and financial institution, the sponsorship. The need is ever growing, and that means that there's an undersupply today of financial institutions to meet the demand of the fintechs, right? So financial institutions like North Bay that have built out a policy, built out a risk tolerance and a governance protocol to serve that need are going to be the lead dogs, are going to be the examples for the other credit unions and financial institutions to follow. There's a significant opportunity here for that. So it's exciting to see, Chris, you and your leadership to come in on that, powered by infrastructure of Braid, which enables much of the technology for that to happen. So there's phenomenal intersections of evolution here that we're seeing. We're seeing also additional clarity, which is now coming around the frontier as it relates to the interaction of the bank and the bank's role as it relates to the evolution, specifically around digital assets and cryptocurrency stablecoin. Just a couple of days ago, the Senate voted on the Genius Act, which essentially brings more clarity in terms of the importance of the role of the bank to participate in that endeavor. So it's the banks that are not sitting on the sidelines, the financial institutions and credit unions like Chris, that's really cutting new territory in this. Banks have historically been the participants as it relates to sponsorship, but to see the untapped potential and opportunity that exists with credit unions, it's inspiring, all powered by the ecosystem, Braid being a center of gravity for that. Associations like NEACH that are conveying the messages and sharing this throughout the ecosystem. And those that are on the front lines that are doing it, Chris and his team there that are actually doing this. We hear the feedback from the FinTechs that are interacting with the relationships like with North Bay with positive feedback, and they're grateful because there honestly is a undersupply of banks that really get it. One of the challenges that FinTechs have with their interactions with the banks or credit unions is just the communication, working with the organizations that really get it and having a path to a successful outcome to help the fintech get to market and vice versa, help the bank meet its goals. I mean, the reason why the bank and credit unions are doing this is to grow the deposits and create fee income for the bank and to be around for the long term to iterate. And so kudos again to Chris and his team for enabling an additional fintech sponsorship opportunity in the industry because the fintechs need it and the banks are now developing and expanding the scope there. So it's exciting to see that. And I see what North Bay is doing as a significant example to others that it can be done and empowered through systems such as Braid and others to make it happen with the proper tools and compliance and the regulatory constructs. That's where the recipe really comes together and it really happens. And that's where the magic happens. So it's great to see it happen and wish you all the best, Chris, with your endeavors. I expect you'll, continue to have lessons learned along the way. That's part of the process, but that's what's to be expected. And we look forward to seeing the successful outcome as the bank and the credit union continues to expand.
Thank you.
Yeah, from the Braid perspective, I think a lot about success definition, right? So I think one of the mistakes institutions will make is they think it has to be, sort of a unicorn vision, right? And the reality is that, because technology has become so commoditized and it's accessible and it's affordable, that you can get involved. You need to be all in. You can't dabble, as Chris said, but you can build a decent business, right? You don't have to build a business that's going to be billions and billions of dollars. Chris is just excited about the future, and he's going to build this, behemoth of a credit union. But I do think that there is an interesting space for institutions that just want to expand beyond their local branch, right? And build, like I said, a decent book of business. Maybe it's $100,000, $200,000 extra a year, $1 million, whatever that may be. With technology like Braid and others, there are many other complementary services out there that make us what we are, that you can do whatever you want. And it just requires action. You just have to act.
Excellent. Chris, do you have any final words before I close us out?
It's been quite a ride, and certainly has presented us with a lot of very interesting challenges and opportunities. I'm just amazed at the demand for these services and the willingness of FinTechs to almost bend over backwards to do whatever we want them to do in terms of compliance and structure to make sure that they can secure these relationships to allow their businesses to thrive. So we're happy that we can, assist in those growth opportunities. We want to be that institution that people look to expand their businesses and extend their reach in different and new areas. So I would encourage other credit unions specifically to take a real strong look at this area and see if it's not something that could benefit your organization and you could take on safely and provide a new service for your membership.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. Daryn, Randy, as always, such a great conversation. So thanks again for joining us. To all the listeners for this special bonus episode of FinTech Shark Week. Huge thanks to our guests again for sharing such a powerful story, one that reminds us what's possible when the right partnerships come together at the right time. And at NEACH, our FinTech inclusion and collaboration initiative isn't just for those ready to, dive deep in, ready to launch, right? It's for the curious, the cautious, the scaling, the seasoned, whether you're just exploring the possibilities, looking for a path forward, or ready to grow, this community is for you. So we'd love to hear from you, connect you with others, and just keep this conversation going. Don't forget, our Future of Payments Symposium is this fall. It is the capstone of this initiative, and it's where community comes together, financial institutions, FinTech, solution providers to really network, learn, and shape what comes next for the industry. And we hope to see you there. So until then, thanks for tuning in. And take care, everybody.
On behalf of NEACH, your trusted resource in payments, and our guests, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more about payments innovation and modernization, you can find the Wrestling Payments Podcast on the podcast page of NEACH.org or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Just search for Wrestling Payments in your podcast app. Thanks for listening.